Charles stood in the parking lot of the most expensive wedding venue in the city, his hands trembling as he gripped a rusty metal gasoline keg. The sweet smell of champagne and roses from inside the ballroom couldn't mask the sharp, nauseating scent of fuel now dripping onto the asphalt beneath him. His tuxedo, perfectly tailored and paid for by people who weren't him, felt like a costume. His breath came in shallow bursts. Behind him, music played. Laughter echoed. Guests clinked glasses, celebrating a union that was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. But Charles wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't even crying. He was numb. And in his mind, only one thought pulsed like a drumbeat. She lied to me. The sleek white luxury car in front of him gleamed under the parking lot lights, a symbol of everything he could never be. Everything he thought he wasn't enough for. He unscrewed the cap. The fumes stung his eyes. And then, without hesitation, he poured. Within seconds, flames roared to life, hungry and unforgiving, consuming metal and leather, and dreams in a violent orange blaze. Screams erupted from the venue entrance. Someone shouted his name. But Charles just stood there, watching it burn, believing he had finally taken back control. What he didn't know yet, what no one knew, was that inside that car, hidden in the back seat, was something that would change everything. Something that would turn his act of revenge into the deepest regret of his entire life. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where are you watching from? Florida, United Kingdom, maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know. Now here's what you need to ask yourself as this story unfolds. What would drive a man to destroy something so valuable on the day he's supposed to be celebrating love? What kind of betrayal cuts so deep that fire feels like the only answer? And most importantly, what was in that car that Charles didn't see coming? Stay close, because this story will make you question everything you think you know about trust, pride, and the cost of jumping to conclusions. This is a story about a wedding that should have been perfect, a groom who couldn't let go of his insecurities, and a bride whose love was mistaken for something far darker. Let's rewind to 6 months before the fire, back when Charles and Alana were just two people trying to make sense of a love that didn't fit neatly into anyone's expectations. Charles grew up in a small town 2 hours outside the city, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business. His father worked double shifts at a factory, his mother cleaned houses on weekends, and Charles learned early that pride was sometimes all you had when money wasn't. He was smart, hardworking, and determined to build a life on his own terms. He believed in earning what you got, in being a man who could provide, in never owing anyone anything. That's who he was. That's who he thought he had to be. Then he met Alana. She walked into the bookstore where he worked part-time during grad school, looking for a gift for her younger brother. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth. They talked about books for an hour. She laughed at his jokes. She didn't mention her last name, and when he asked her out for coffee, she said yes without hesitation. For the first 3 months, Charles had no idea who she really was. He didn't know her father owned half the commercial real estate downtown. He didn't know she grew up in a gated estate with a staff of 12. He didn't know that the car she drove, a modest sedan, was deliberately chosen to avoid attention. He just knew she was kind, thoughtful, and somehow saw him in a way no one else ever had. When he finally found out, it was by accident. A friend showed him a news article about a charity gala, and there she was in the photo, standing beside her father, wearing a gown that probably cost more than Charles made in 6 months. He confronted her that night, feeling blindsided and embarrassed. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him with tears in her eyes and said, "Because I wanted you to love me for me, not for what my family has." And he believed her. He wanted to believe her. But from that moment on, something shifted. A small crack formed in his confidence, a whisper in the back of his mind that maybe he wasn't enough, that maybe this whole thing was a mistake. As their relationship deepened, so did Charles's insecurity. Alana's family was polite but distant. Her father shook his hand firmly but never asked him about his career. Her mother smiled but always seemed to be evaluating him. At family dinners, Charles felt like an outsider, surrounded by conversations about investments, board meetings and vacation homes in places he'd never been. He tried to contribute, tried to prove he belonged, but every attempt felt like confirmation that he didn't. Alana noticed. She tried to reassure him, tried to make him see that her love wasn't conditional on wealth or status, but Charles couldn't shake the feeling that he was being judged, that everyone was waiting for him to fail, to prove he was just a poor kid who got lucky. When Alana proposed they get married, Charles was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure. He wanted to marry her more than anything, but he also wanted to do it right. He wanted to pay for the ring himself, plan a wedding they could afford, start their life together on equal footing. But Alana's family had other ideas. Her father insisted on covering the wedding costs, said it was tradition, said it would be an insult to refuse. Charles fought it at first, but Alana begged him to let it go, to just focus on their future together. So he agreed. And with every decision made without his input, every vendor chosen by her mother, every detail handled by someone else's money, Charles felt smaller. The final breaking point came 3 weeks before the wedding. Charles went to Alana's father's office to drop off some documents she'd forgotten at his apartment. The office was empty, but a folder sat open on the desk, marked with his name. Curiosity got the better of him. Inside were financial documents, legal papers he didn't fully understand, references to asset protection, and clauses he'd never seen before. He saw his name next to terms like limited access and conditional rights. Panic set in. Was this a prenup? Was her family trying to control him? Was Alana in on it? He didn't ask. He didn't confront anyone. He just let the anger fester, let the assumptions grow, let the pride he'd carried his whole life turn into something uglier. By the time the wedding day arrived, Charles was a shell of the man who'd proposed. He smiled for photos, shook hands with guests, and went through the motions. But inside, he was drowning. He kept replaying that folder in his mind, kept imagining worst-case scenarios, kept telling himself he was being used. And when he overheard Alana's cousins laughing about a surprise involving a car, something inside him snapped. He didn't stop to think. He didn't ask questions. He just acted. And that's how a man who thought he was reclaiming his dignity ended up standing in a parking lot, watching flames devour the one thing he thought symbolized everything wrong with his life. But here's what Charles didn't know, what he couldn't have known in that moment of blinding rage. Alana had spent months planning something for him, something that had nothing to do with control or contracts or keeping him in his place. She had been working in secret, using her own money to give him a gift that would show him exactly how much she believed in him, in them, in the life they were building together. And that gift was sitting in the backseat of the car he just set on fire. The flames climbed higher, licking at the night sky, casting wild shadows across the parking lot. Charles stood frozen, the empty gasoline keg still in his hand, his chest heaving with adrenaline, and something that felt like victory but tasted like ash. For a brief, terrible moment, he felt powerful. He felt like he'd finally done something. Made a statement, refused to be the fool everyone expected him to be. But that moment shattered the instant he heard her voice. Alana, screaming his name. He turned and saw her running toward him, her wedding dress trailing behind her, her face twisted in shock and disbelief. Guests poured out of the venue entrance, some pointing, some pulling out phones, some just staring in frozen horror. Her father pushed through the crowd, his face red with fury. Security guards sprinted toward the flames, shouting orders, trying to figure out what had just happened. Charles's hands started shaking. The keg slipped from his grip and clattered onto the pavement. Alana reached him first, grabbing his arms, her voice breaking. "What did you do? Charles, what did you do?" He tried to explain, tried to put into words the anger and humiliation that had been building for months. But nothing came out right. He stammered something about the folder, about the cousins, about feeling like he didn't matter. Alana's eyes widened, confusion mixing with heartbreak. "What folder? What are you talking about?" But before he could answer, someone screamed from near the car. "Oh my God, there's something inside! The fire is spreading to the back seat." Time seemed to slow. A security guard ran forward with a fire extinguisher, spraying foam onto the inferno, but the flames were too strong, too far gone. Another guard pulled out his phone, shouting for the fire department. Alana's father grabbed Charles by the collar, his voice a low growl. You just destroyed a $300,000 vehicle, you unstable lunatic. I'm calling the police. But Alana wasn't listening to her father. She was staring at the car, her face going pale, her hands trembling. She whispered something Charles couldn't hear, then louder, almost frantic. No, 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 it can't be in there. I moved it. I thought I moved it. Charles felt his stomach drop. What are you talking about? What was in there? Alana didn't answer. She just sank to her knees on the asphalt, her dress pooling around her, tears streaming down her face. Firefighters arrived within minutes, dousing the blaze, turning the luxury car into a smoldering, unrecognizable husk of metal and smoke. The crowd watched in stunned silence as two firefighters carefully approached the wreckage, using tools to pry open what was left of the back seat. One of them reached inside and pulled out a blackened metal box, about the size of a shoebox. Its edges melted but still intact. He carried it over to the security team, setting it down gently on the pavement. Alana stood up slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked toward it like she was approaching a grave. Charles followed, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. What is that? Alana didn't look at him. She just knelt beside the box, her hands hovering over it, afraid to touch it, afraid of what she might find inside. One of the firefighters carefully opened the latch. The lid creaked, smoke rising from the interior. And then Alana broke. She let out a sob so raw, so full of grief, that everyone within earshot felt it in their bones. Charles stepped closer, trying to see inside the box, trying to understand what he'd done. And that's when he saw it. Papers, burned and curled at the edges, but still partially readable. A small velvet pouch, charred but recognizable, and something else, something metallic, glinting faintly in the firelight. Alana reached into the box with shaking hands and pulled out a half-melted USB drive. Her voice was barely a whisper. This was supposed to be for you. During the reception, I was going to surprise you. Charles felt like the ground had disappeared beneath him. What? What is it? Alana finally looked at him, her eyes red and swollen, her voice thick with pain. It's everything I've been working on for the last 6 months. Everything I wanted to give you. Everything I thought would make you feel like you belonged. She pulled out one of the burned papers, unfolding it carefully. It was a property deed, singed but still legible, with Charles' name on it. I bought land in your hometown, she said, her voice breaking. I wanted us to build something there. A home. Somewhere that was ours, not my family's, not anyone else's. Just ours. Charles felt his knees go weak. He reached for the paper, but his hands were shaking too much to hold it. Alana pulled out another document, this one barely readable, covered in soot. These are letters I wrote to you over the last 2 years. Every time I felt like you were pulling away, every time I saw you struggling with my family's expectations, I wrote you a letter. I was going to give them all to you tonight, so you could see how much I believed in you. She reached into the velvet pouch and pulled out a small tarnished ring. This was my grandfather's. He built his business from nothing, just like you're trying to do. I wanted you to have it, to remind you that you don't need my family's money to be enough. You already are. Charles couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He just stared at the ring, at the letters, at the deed with his name on it, and felt the full weight of what he'd done crash down on him like a collapsing building. Alana held up the USB drive, tears streaming down her face. And this, she said, her voice barely audible, was a video I made for you. I wanted to show it during the reception, in front of everyone, so they could all see how proud I am to marry you. So they could all see that you're not just some guy who got lucky. You're the man I chose, the man I love, the man I want to build a life with. The parking lot was silent. Guests stood in clusters, some crying, some too shocked to move. Alana's father had gone pale, his anger replaced by something that looked like pity. Security guards exchanged uncomfortable glances. And Charles just stood there, the man who thought he was taking back his dignity, realizing he destroyed the one thing that could have saved him from his own insecurities. He tried to speak, tried to apologize, but the words caught in his throat. Alana stood up, clutching the charred box to her chest, and looked at him with eyes that held more sadness than anger. I wasn't trying to control you, Charles. I was trying to show you that you were never beneath me, that you never had to prove anything. But you didn't trust me. You didn't ask. You just assumed the worst and set everything on fire. Before Charles could respond, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. Alana's father stepped forward, his voice cold and final. Officers are on their way. You'll be arrested for property destruction at minimum, possibly more depending on what they find. I suggest you use whatever time you have left to think about what you've done. Charles looked at Alana, desperate, pleading. I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know. She wiped her eyes and took a step back. I know you didn't. But that's the problem, Charles. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't trust me enough to believe I could love you without conditions. And now she gestured to the smoldering wreckage, to the destroyed gifts, to the ruined wedding. Now we both have to live with what happens when pride matters more than trust. If this story has your heart racing, comment, I'm still watching. Let's see who's truly following until the end. Because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, revenge, and the cost of letting your insecurities win. Charles is about to face consequences he never imagined, and Alana is about to make a decision that will define the rest of both their lives. Stay close. The police arrived and took Charles into custody without resistance. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He just let them handcuff him, lead him to the patrol car, and drive him away while wedding guests whispered and recorded videos on their phones. Alana watched from a distance, still holding the burned box, her face unreadable. Her father wanted to press full charges, wanted Charles prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, but Alana refused. She told the police she needed time to think, time to process what had happened before making any decisions about legal action. So Charles spent the night in a holding cell, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that led him to that parking lot. The next morning, Alana's father posted bail, not out of kindness, but out of a desire to keep the situation from becoming a media circus. Charles was released with conditions: stay away from Alana's family property, attend mandatory counseling, and await a court date. He returned to his apartment, a tiny studio that suddenly felt even smaller, and sat on the edge of his bed, numb. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages from friends, family, people who'd seen videos of the fire online. Some were angry, some were concerned. Most just wanted to know what the hell he'd been thinking. He didn't answer any of them. 3 days later, Alana showed up at his door. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Charles opened the door, too surprised to speak. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked in, set the burned metal box on his kitchen counter, and turned to face him. I need you to understand something, she said, her voice steady but fragile. I'm not here to forgive you. I'm not here to tell you everything's okay. I'm here because I need to know if you actually loved me or if you just loved the idea of proving you were good enough. Charles felt his throat tighten. I loved you. I still love you. Then why didn't you trust me? Alana's voice cracked. Why didn't you come to me when you found that folder? Why didn't you ask me what those papers meant? Charles sat down heavily, his hands covering his face. I thought you were trying to trap me. I thought your family was setting me up to be controlled, to be kept in place. I thought I was just another investment they were protecting. Alana shook her head, tears spilling over. Those papers were asset protection documents my father insisted on because of his own paranoia, not mine. I fought him on it. I told him I didn't want a prenup, didn't want conditions, didn't want anything that made you feel less than equal. But he wouldn't listen, so I made him agree to a compromise. The documents would only apply to assets acquired before we met, nothing we built together. I was going to explain all of it to you before the wedding, but I wanted to wait until after I gave you the surprise, so you'd see that I was serious about us being partners. Charles looked up at her, his eyes red. I ruined everything. Alana didn't argue. She just stood there, arms crossed, looking at the man she thought she'd spend her life with. Yeah, she said quietly. You did. And I don't know if we can come back from this. Charles wanted to beg, to plead, to promise he'd change, but he knew words didn't mean anything anymore. So he just sat there, letting the silence stretch between them, letting her decide what came next. After what felt like an eternity, Alana picked up the burned box and walked toward the door. She paused, her hand on the handle, and looked back at him. I'll be at the address on that deed in 3 months. I'm going to start building the house we were supposed to build together. If you figure out how to trust me, how to trust yourself, maybe you can come find me. But if you can't, Charles, if you're still carrying all this pride and fear, then don't, because I can't spend my life proving I love you. You have to believe it. And then she left. The door clicked shut, and Charles was alone again, staring at the space where she'd stood, knowing he'd just been given a chance he wasn't sure he deserved. The weeks that followed were the hardest of his life. He attended court-mandated therapy, where a counselor forced him to confront the insecurities he'd been carrying since childhood. The belief that he had to earn love, that vulnerability was weakness, that asking for help meant failure. He started journaling, writing letters to Alana he never sent, trying to untangle the mess of emotions that had led him to that parking lot. He reached out to his parents, had long, painful conversations about pride and self-worth and the difference between confidence and arrogance. Slowly, painfully, he started to see himself more clearly. 3 months passed. Charles stood at the edge of a plot of land in his hometown, the deed clutched in his hand, the same deed Alana had tried to give him on their wedding day. She'd mailed it to him 2 weeks earlier, with no note, no explanation, just the deed and a construction schedule. He'd spent days debating whether to come, whether he had any right to show up after everything he'd done. But in the end, he realized that staying away would just be another form of pride, another way of protecting himself instead of fighting for what mattered. So he came. The house was already taking shape. Wooden frames outlined rooms, workers moved efficiently across the site, and in the center of it all stood Alana, wearing jeans and a hard hat, talking to a contractor. She looked up and saw him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she walked over, stopping a few feet away, her expression unreadable. "You came," she said. Charles nodded. "I almost didn't. I wasn't sure I deserved to." Alana looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "You don't deserve it, Charles. Not yet. But I believe you can. That's why I'm still here. That's why I'm still building this." Charles felt tears prick his eyes. "I'm in therapy. I'm working on it. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did, why I let fear control me." Alana nodded slowly. "Good, because I need to know that if we try this again, you won't run the first time things get hard. I need to know that you trust me enough to ask questions instead of making assumptions." Charles took a deep breath. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll try. I can promise I'll fight for us instead of against you." Alana looked out at the house, at the life they were supposed to build together, then back at him. That's all I needed to hear. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. They just stood there. Two people who'd almost lost everything, beginning the slow, uncertain process of rebuilding trust. It would take time. It would take work. It would take countless conversations and moments of doubt and choices to believe in each other even when it was hard. But they were willing to try. And sometimes that's all love really is. The choice to keep trying, even after the fire, even after the damage, even after the pride and fear have burned everything down. Because what Charles learned, what Alana already knew, was that love isn't about being perfect or proving you're enough. It's about being honest, being vulnerable, and trusting that the person across from you will choose you anyway. The house was finished 8 months later. Charles and Alana moved in together, not as a married couple, but as partners rebuilding something stronger than what they'd had before. They planted a garden in the front yard, hung photos on the walls, and slowly, carefully built a life that belonged to both of them equally. Some of their friends asked if they'd ever get married again. Alana always smiled and said, "Maybe someday, when we're ready." Charles would add, "When I'm worthy of it." And Alana would correct him, "When you believe you already are." So here's the question I want you to think about. What would you have done if you were Charles? Would you have set that car on fire? Or would you have asked questions first? And if you were Alana, could you have forgiven someone who destroyed your trust on the day you were supposed to start forever together? Could a single misunderstanding, fueled by pride and fear, ruin everything you'd built? Or could love, real love, survive even the worst mistakes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and whether you think Charles deserved a second chance. And if you thought this story was intense, wait until you hear the next one, because we're just getting started. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that stays with you long after the video ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.